Everybody, Invisiblekatana here with my very late review of The Last of Us Season 1 finale, Look for the Light. Doing a bunch of reviews all at once right now because last week was just an absolute disaster. Actually, 2 weeks ago, my laptop died. All of last week I was trying to figure stuff out. Just did not have a lot of time. Had a whole bunch of random other issues outside of the laptop, so I didn't even get to just sit down and do this. So, season finale of The Last of Us. Definitely enjoyed it. I would say I like the ending more now than I did when I originally played the game, because when I beat the game initially and it ends and it's just like, okay, and that's the end of the game, it was like, okay. It was like, it was interesting. I didn't particularly like that was how it ended, where it was just like, it just felt like, it felt like it fell flat a little bit. Everything leading up to that was intense, of course. Excuse me, going through and we got the giraffe scene. Of course, everybody was waiting for that. They did do the giraffes. We of course got the hospital. We were missing out on the infected, naturally. I guess they were just like, look, we gave you one in the beginning. Jesus, what do you want? Maybe some more infected, for God's sake. Like the whole season, like I said it a bunch. Every time I watch a review, everybody's like, where are they at? Where are they at? But we got one. So I guess we can start, officially with the beginning of the episode, where we do have Ashley Johnson, who of course is the voice of Ellie, actually playing Ellie's mom. So that was very cool. The way that was handled was definitely well done, giving her that role and kind of, in a sense, sort of, passing the torch a little bit. And I like the way that was done. And it was also very interesting because it adds context to something that was not done in the games, where it was Ellie is immune and she just is. We don't know why, we don't know how, she just is. And that's all there is to it. She is. In this, they actually give a full-on definitive answer. I would have to look it up. I'm sure it's in one of the behind the scenes things. I know that they put out a full-on making The Last of Us thing, which is different than like the podcast stuff that they did. So if you are looking for any behind the scenes stuff, if you didn't know that, by the way, every single episode has a podcast thing that's behind the scenes where they explain some of the extra stuff that went on in the episode. And then the making of thing, I assume, is basically just like, maybe a 30-40 minute episode where it's like for the whole season, I would assume. But I like how they did that. I thought it was a really cool thing. And it was interesting seeing like the full-on version of it, where it's like, hey, this is now the definitive answer as to why she's immune. Her mother was bit just as she was being born, which, you're fighting for your life. You stab this thing and kill it. Kind of makes sense that would force that baby right out, and you just be like, oh snap, it's out already. It's like, yeah, your water already broke. That sort of pressure and intensity is like, yeah, that makes sense. So I can totally see that. Not entirely certain how she got bit on the leg, because I could have sworn when it came at her, it was pretty much all kind of face-to-face sort of deal. I guess it did stumble in at first, so I guess it was there. But that's just how they do it. Whenever anyone's bitten anything, you're just like, I don't really know when that happened, but you said it happened, so I don't have a choice. But in that moment, I like how they did it, where she's bit and then she cuts the umbilical cord, and then of course when Marlene comes in, it's like, I got her, I cut the umbilical cord before I was bit, and Marlene was like, how did you? And it's like, before. And then that was it. And it was like, okay. So I like that they, how they did that. And obviously that showed that sort of serious relationship between those two characters, where she knows that just doesn't work. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, so you had the baby pop out, you cut the umbilical cord, and then while you were kind of like, just had the baby, like you got bit like right after, and then you killed the thing, and then you can't, like, it's just, the function of that doesn't really work. But she accepted it because it's like, this is my best friend, and my best friend is dying, and she just gave birth basically to my niece, who in a sense becomes her full-on daughter. And it's like, all right, that's all there is to it. Like she said before, I'll just take this before. And it was an emotional sequence where I'm not the only person that mentioned this. I'm sure if you've watched other reviews, everyone said it. She said to cover her ears, and they didn't have to cover her ears. It was just like, come on, continuity wise, just have the dude actually do it when she says to do that. And like, somehow they just, like, I don't know if they just didn't do they didn't like the take. And during the one take they used, the guy actually kind of forgot to even make like the motion or whatever. But it was like, guys, she just did it. I'm pretty sure it wasn't technically a one shot. Like, they cut to show her like hand the baby. So in the world of filming, there's like a million ways that could have gone down, where those were very separate times that they filmed that technically. But I'm just like, dang, somebody they needed a continuity. They needed me there. I think of that all the time. I'm like, man, if I got a job as a continuity guy, I would be like, that dust was over there. Like, I'd be like real OCD about that junk. Like, I'd just like move one little thing, like that coffee cup, never would have happened. Check this out. You can't see that mouse anymore. Continuity. See? Paying attention. But I like the way it was handled. I like how they did it. It was a really good opening. An emotional opening. We knew what was going to happen there. It's like, hey, that's a crappy way to have things happen. You have your child, and you can only hope, of course, in that moment when she's bit and she knows how that's going, obviously, that blood flow and stuff, that her cutting the umbilical cord as quickly as she could, you can only hope that works. And you have to spend what little time you truly have with your child, and then ask your best friend to kill you. And so, that's our opening. And then of course we go into the rest of the episode, and we have our big time skip after Winter and after David and that emotional moment that Ellie had after, the "it's okay baby girl" moment. And now we have Joel and Ellie, and they're just cool. Like, Joel is the guy who's talking. Like, he's the one who's like, hey, like, I used to do this, and this thing used to happen. Like, he's just talking to her just naturally. They reference the guitar. Still have to wait and see what happens for season 2, because there was a very specific thing with the music, and they literally cannot use the song that they use, which is very unfortunate, because it's a good song. But we'll see what they do with that. But they reference the whole guitar thing. They go through the motions and stuff, and as things kind of build up, we eventually get to the giraffe scene, which I wasn't the only person that thought this, because I did watch a review like a week ago. I wasn't the only person that thought this. He went up 4 effing flights of stairs. And I'm like, how tall is this giraffe going to be? Because when she dropped the ladder, I'm like, okay, they're in a construction building. First off, I don't know how he wouldn't have seen it, because they were in a construction building. Like, he references like the fact that it was meant to be demolished, and like they dropped bombs, and the building was the only thing that wasn't destroyed. And so she's like, holy crap. Like, and she takes off to see the giraffe. And I'm like, it's a construction building. Like, it doesn't make sense that she could see the giraffe, but he couldn't if he just turned his head. Cause I'm like, well, where the F is this giraffe even at? So I was like, it could be slightly off and she's, sees it at a far window or whatever. But then he climbs up the ladder, and I'm like, okay, they're already on they're on the first floor. So that worked. It was like, they're on the first floor. And then he went up like 3 effing flights of stairs. And I'm like, how tall is giraffes aren't that big. And then of course they come out, and it's like, that's the top of the giraffe. And I'm like, is it though? Cause he went up 4 effing flights of stairs. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. And I remember when I watched the review, dude said the exact same thing, where it was like, he went up a lot of flights of stairs. I was like, he sure did. And I thought that was very funny, but I was like, you let it pass. So we of course have the giraffe sequence, and they pet the giraffes. A lot of people were surprised that it was not CG. I am one of those people as well, because no joke, there were some scenes like when they would, it's funny, when they did the close-up shots, it looked more CG than it did when they did the far away stuff, which I know makes no sense, but obviously it's because the blue screen was CG. Something about it just made it look fake. I don't know if it was like the haze around it made it look CG, because it was like the unnatural coloring that they had to add to it to be like, okay, the sun is, wherever they pretended the sun was going to be. I don't know what it was, but it definitely looked fake. Like, you could tell it was real when they were actually feeding. I was like, okay, no, that thing's actually eating off of her hand. That's not even like a really good animatronic. I'm like, that's a giraffe. I could tell that it was a real giraffe, but it definitely looked fake more when it was close up, to me at least. It's so weird to think that, but I'm like, when they first showed, I was like, oh crap, they got a giraffe. And then when they did the close up, I was like, or maybe it's CG. And then once it started eating, I was like, oh no, it's not CG, it's a real giraffe. But it's so weird that it looked fake close up, but not when it was far away. I don't know how that worked with my eyes, but I was like, that's really weird. Because I was like, I thought for sure that was CG for it was going back and forth. I'm like, nope, that's, it was, like I said, when it was eating, it was obviously way too fluid to be a fake giraffe. I'm like, that's just too fluid. So that's a real giraffe. That definitely was like, that was a weird moment, because I'm like, it's weird how that looks fake. And I think it was because of the whole blue screen thing. It was because they didn't make an actual set around it. That was when they did just full on blue screen. So I think that's really what did it, that everything else around it was fake, and just the way they had to fake the lighting on it, it just made it look fake. It's really weird. Like I said, looked real when it was further away than when it was up close. Don't know how that makes sense, but that's how my brain was working at the time. And I'm just like, I thought it too, for like half a second. Like I said, once she did the feeding thing, I was like, okay, no, that's 100% a giraffe. But definitely had that epic sequence, so that was really cool that they did. And then of course after that, things kind of build up a little bit. Ellie is feeling a little bit better, and they have a conversation, which I didn't remember that this was in the original game. I thought it was a bit more vague, because I feel like when I was watching this, I was like, wow, Joel sucks. Joel is like definitively the bad guy. I felt like And like I said, hadn't played the game in forever. Even when I played it, and you know what? This actually leads back into the infected thing. It's because when they have that conversation, that's at the beginning of that level. And after you have that giraffe moment, they don't just walk in the street like they do in the episode where it's like, oh, I'm in the mood for some jokes, and then they get hit with a flashbang and taken out. You have an entire segment where after the giraffe moment, because technically I think you're in a train station. So they end up going up to the second level, they see the giraffes, and then it's like, all right, well, let's go on. And then they basically go back in the building and they have to go underground into like the subway portion of it. And so it's a whole segment where you go through and you fight. Like, it's a huge space and stuff you go through. I think there's like a bloater in there, there's clickers. I think like almost every version is in like this final segment because it's the last time you fight any of the infected in the game. So I think there's at least one bloater, stuff like that. You go through like a whole segment. They don't have that in the show. So I think that's why in the game, I thought it was a bit more ambiguous. Like, is he the villain? Is he not the villain? I was always on the side of like, well, especially when I like first played it, was kind of like, he did a crappy thing, but it was super ambiguous because it was just like, well, is it gonna work? Is it not gonna work? It might have worked, but may not have worked. I think I mentioned before, it was like everyone says like they never gave her a chance in the game, and they didn't. And same with the show. But in this, I was able to remember that conversation that Ellie has with Joel, where she's like, it can't have just been for nothing. And it made it, to me at least, it felt very definitive where she's like, this can't just be like, meh, nothing happens, and then all those people that died just because. And it was like, that's exactly what he made happen. And it felt like they were bringing some stuff over from the second game, but apparently that was always in the first game. That was always there where she has that conversation with him, and she specifically says it on like, it can't have just been for nothing. And he makes it that way. So I had forgotten that, when I first played the game, I'd forgotten that specific conversation, but a much shorter time span. So watching it, I was like, oh no, this makes him way worse. It was, I felt more ambiguous only because I forgot that conversation when I played the game. And then the show was like, well, that was only 30 minutes ago. I remember her specifically saying it can't have been for nothing. So let's kind of go forward, because it was like, we don't have to do this. And it's like, nope, we have to go to the very end and see what basically see what can be done. It can't be for nothing. And then he kind of makes it for nothing. And they also changed some stuff around with the whole cure element, because in the game, definitely ambiguous, 100%. That was another element of it. Like, even forgetting her having said that, certainly was still ambiguous. It was like, it could work, meh, maybe. And this Marlene, in the show at least, Marlene seemed excessively sure, where it was like, this is exactly how it would happen. We're going to do this, and then we'll do this, and then we will mass produce a cure. It was like she laid out the full-on steps from point A to point B, and that was it. It was like, this is how we're going to do it. In the game, it wasn't like that. At least I don't remember it being that way. It felt like it was definitely a lot more ambiguous, and they definitely make it ambiguous in the second game, where they were just like, we don't really know 100%. But it was interesting. In the show, I was like, I don't remember it being super definitive like it was, or like this in the video game. It was like she knew what she was talking about, and like, this is exactly how they're going to do it, and it will be a cure 100%. That's how I felt. May not have been 100%. There's still the element of people being like, well, considering what the Fireflies did, like they even have the conversation during the Left Behind episode, like, oh, so you have these pipe bombs, and then she's like, well, I wouldn't have let them hurt you. And it's like, yeah, because they were listening to a kid, they would have stopped, they would have let you stop them from blowing up a random place. So it was like, there's still that element of, could they truly be trusted to actually just give out a cure to all of humanity? Maybe not. They probably definitely end up pulling the we're in power card now, because we have the cure, and if you want to have the cure, follow us. Definitely a plausible thing. But either way, the conversation with Ellie being way more prominent in my mind, and the fact that, to me at least, made it seem a lot more definitive that they actually did have a cure and knew exactly what to do with it. It just made Joel seem way worse than in the game, where it felt more ambiguous. And it was like, oh no, he's actually, like I said, the way the dialogue went, it just felt like he's 100% stopping a cure from happening. And then, they go through the moment, which was very well done, playing like this somber music, and it's just this slow music, and it's like, it's sad, but it's I don't know, it was really interesting. It was incredibly well done, because in the game, it's like, it's gunfire and stuff, and you're just like, I gotta survive because I have to make it to Ellie. And this, though, it was like, it's just music, muffled sound effects here and there, and it's just Joel taking people out as he goes through this hospital. He takes out the guys on the stairs. Then of course he goes through, like, you know, of course the scene where the guy actually gives up, and then they just show Joel, and it's like, boom, and he just kills him anyway. And he's going through, you know, very video game. He's like, all right, well, I ran out of ammo here, you know, let me pick up the hand, you know, it ends with the handgun and stuff like that. You run out of ammo. And I was like, this is really well done. Very, very well done. And then of course he gets to Ellie and he gets to the medical room. Also, one of the women that was there was Laura Bailey. And it was really funny. Even with like the medical stuff on, I was like, there was like just a hint where I was like, I feel like I recognize one of these women. And I did, because it's Laura Bailey, who apparently was one of the nurses in the original game, but she actually plays the character of Abby, who's, you know, from the second game. So that was actually really cool, because I watched something with that where they asked like, oh, was that to put her in because she plays such a prominent role in the second game? And it was like, actually it's because she was in the first game as one of those nurses, so we kind of gave her that role again. I was like, oh, that's really cool, because I never knew that. I thought for sure, like a lot of people, oh, it's because she was Abby in the sequel. They were like, hey, here's like a little cool hint at a live action moment. So maybe when we get season 2, or they said they were splitting up part 2 into 2 seasons, so season 2 or season 3, maybe she'll have a role just like Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson did, where, and even, you know, Jeffrey Pierce, who was Tommy in the game. So, you know, they gave everyone who was like a big player a physical role. So maybe she'll have that as well when we get to either season 2 or season 3. She'll just have like an actual full-on role, because they treated everybody really well. Either you got like an epic sequence or you got multiple episodes. So I thought they did a great job bringing the voice actors in and giving them like really cool roles. So that was pretty sweet to see, but it was awesome. She had, you know, a little cameo there, and like I said, I'm sure she'll be back, considering for one, you can't really even see her face in this, so it'll be easy to bring her back. And two, she played a very prominent character in the second game, so she does deserve to have kind of the treatment that everyone else got live action wise. So I'm sure they'll do that, no problem. But I thought that was cool, and you know, hearing about that later, I was like, oh, did not know that she was a nurse in the first game. So that was what it was a nod to, not actually her role in the second game. So go through there, of course, kills the first doctor, is like, hey, just unhook her, like, and you can go, and plain and simple. They do that, and he takes her out, and they have the scene with Marlene, and you know, they do exactly what they did in the game, where it was like, they have the conversation like kind of beat for beat. It was like, you know that this is what she would want. Once again, in the game, I forgot that full conversation that Ellie had with him, and then in this, it was like, oh dang, she's right. She knows for sure, like factually, like this is what Ellie would want, and you know that. And she was right, and he was 100% wrong, because it was, like I said, felt more ambiguous in the game. And to me in this, it was almost like they worked towards making it that way, potentially because of stuff. But it seemed like they definitively made it more like, no, this was just bad. And that's how I saw it. More ambiguous in the game, I personally felt, compared to this, even though that conversation was there, which kind of, if I remember that, you know, we're infected to spread things out. Had I remembered that, I probably would have been more on the side of Joel's just like straight up the villain. He was always a bad guy. Like I was never like in love with Joel. I was never really in love with the first game. I know that's a whole thing in the community, like the first game versus the second game. I personally like the second game more. I know that's like controversial. But I like dark stories. That's just me. I'm like a weird person. I'm like, no, it's just effed up, and that's it. And I'm just like, harsh, but I love it. I love it. So I always like the second game more personally, but I like what they did. I definitely like how they handled it. And like I said, I personally feel like they made it a lot more definitive that he was just the bad guy for doing what he did. The scene with Marlene, I always felt bad for her. Like even in the game, I was just like, that specific moment just always felt like, man, he's bad for doing that. Like even going through, and maybe, you know, once again, cutscene versus gameplay, even going through and like killing all the other people in the hospital, that specific scene with her where it's just like, please, you know, first off, you know, she'd want to do this. And also, you know, I know what you feel, because, you know, that's Marlene's whole thing, where it's like, that's why she didn't want Joel to like either, you know, be killed or anything like that. It's like, just let him sit and kind of just have a moment to himself, or, you know, kind of just let him like kind of get him out of here. Because he needs to just kind of be as far away as possible from this scenario, because I know what he feels. I know the attachment he has now because of their journey. And believe me, I've had it literally since the day of her birth. So that scene, even in the game, was always really intense to me, where it was just like, man, that's so sad how it you know, plays out for Marlene, especially. And, you know, they cut to him in the car and you think he drove away. And then of course you hear Ellie. and he tells her the story of like, this is what happened and stuff like that. And then they of course cut back to him shooting her in the stomach, and then they kind of go forward again, and then they jump back a little bit later where she's on the ground, and just the scene of her saying like, we'll leave you alone, and like, please just like go. He's like, just the cold Terminator like presence of that moment was just like intense. It was like, you'd only come after her, boom. And it was just like, it was always such a sad moment to me in that game where it's just like, man, it just seems so effed up, because it is. it's just really effed up. But that was always the moment that always really got me amongst all the things he did, I guess, because it's the final person really, and it's much calmer. Once again, cutscene versus gameplay, where it's like a bunch of people and machine guns and bullets flying here and there, versus just she has him. And of course I love the way they do it, where he had his gun ready the whole time underneath Ellie's outfit. I don't think they really show it as well in the show. In the game, I think they specifically do it where like he kind of lifts back a little bit to fully aim the gun and shoot her in the stomach. I don't think they really did that. I think they basically just do the sound effect. I don't think they actually even show it. They just like have the sound effect go off, and that's what happened there. But I think in the game they showed it like just a little bit more, where he like kind of lifts up and is like, oh, he's been holding a gun this whole time in case he needs to basically just shoot anyone right in front of him. And so when he does the slow turn, it seems like he's thinking, he's just kind of waiting to kind of line up his shot, and it's like boom, and then he gets her, and then puts Ellie in the car and everything. You'd only come after her, finishes the job, and then of course he lies. He says they've been raided. He says the stuff about the cure, but I don't think they referenced the raid in the video game. I think it was just the cure thing. It was like, yeah, they had a bunch of people and they just basically stopped looking, is what he says in the game. And I think in this, he kind of references the cure. And then of course he does the raid thing. So, then they go through, and, the very end of the episode, I almost said the game, very end of the episode, he's going through and he's just talking about Sarah. Like, I think you really would have liked her if she was like this and stuff like that. Or, she would have liked you because of this. And then I think you would have liked her too. And then going through, and as he's having his moment, Ellie stops and is like, did this really happen? Like, basically, was it all worth nothing? And so, he tries to give that epic speech at the end, and she cuts him off, and it's just like, swear to me that everything you said about the Fireflies and the raid and all that stuff was true. He says, I swear. And I feel like they held on it longer in this than they did in the game. I felt like it was super quick in the game, where it was like, it was definitely a pause, and then it was just like, okay, and then it cuts. And then in this, I felt like you can kind of see her going longer through the emotions of it, of making the decision to choose to like believe him. Because in the first game, when the first game ended, I think a part of it being like what I felt was a lot quicker, made it seem ambiguous as to what she even felt. And I think in this, they almost made it very clear. It was like, she doesn't believe him, but she's just like, okay, like she accepts that she doesn't believe him. And I think in the game, it was almost even ambiguous as to whether or not what she said was what she felt. I think in the show, they made it, once again, I felt like lingering on it longer made it clearer that she doesn't believe him, but she was kind of going through that process of being like, let me just turn it off and just say, okay, I believe him, and I will go, with this new life. And in the game, I think, once again, a little bit shorter, made it a bit more ambiguous whether or not she believed him, and you couldn't even tell what she thought when it ended. Personal opinion, of course. But they ended, no cliffhanger, no nothing, no teases or slight, switches to be like, hey, here's kind of a lead into what would happen in part 2 / season 2. It was just how the game ended is how the show ended. So no cliffhangers or anything extra, or throwing extra characters in or anything like that to kind of hint towards what's to come next. So I actually really appreciated that. I think a lot of people knowing the story were super curious, like, all right, well, where do we go going forward? What are they going to do? So kept it simple, kept it directly to the game with its alterations, of course. And it was a good ending. I think, like I said, they made it way more definitive that Joel is just straight up the bad guy. They made it very definitive that if they don't put more effing infected in season 2, I will hate this show. I won't hate it, but I'll be super pissed because, hey, remember that thing from season 2 or episode 2 where they're like, hey, you know how we changed the spores and it's tendrils now, and that can wake up a whole army and this and that, and it never comes back? Not even for like they killed one and only 2 showed up. Like, literally, just have it where like only a couple showed up at like some point. Like, I don't know why they didn't do it for Left Behind. Like, honestly, that would have been like the perfect moment because they wouldn't need a ton. They could have done, they honestly could have just done 5 In all, I think in the game it's like basically like 10. It's honestly kind of like the Swarm, where like it's a lot and they run through them all for quite a bit of time. And it's just like, man, they didn't think at any point that they should bring that back, even if it was just to switch it up, because obviously the whole sport thing was like, how do we really make that work realistically? Like, you're the reason that you made it into something different. Even outside of that, they needed more infected. Like, that's just a fact, because they barely had any, like, at all, compared to, not even just compared to the game, compared to what any zombie series or post-apocalyptic monster series, whatever you want to call it, even compared to anything else, they were severely lacking in, you know, undead, infected zombies, if it was vampires, whatever, severely lacking throughout the entire season. And it was like, dang, you hardly utilize them. There's one in the whole episode. They easily could have had more. He's shooting up a hospital. That could have brought a swarm. They could have, like, that could have changed up the ending and like kind of doubled things up a little bit or something. Just have the segment where they fight together. That's something else that I think was missing from the show, unfortunately, because I was looking forward to it, I think from like maybe episode 3, where in the game they have a scene, it's when they have the hotel. Obviously things are all super switched around and stuff. They technically go through that hotel in like episode 2, but in the game, when you go to the hotel, that is where Ellie ends up saving Joel, where she kills a guy. And then after that hotel sequence, it's like, okay, I trust you to use a gun. And she flat out helps him and like takes a bunch of people, like she's the sniper, and you go through and kind of try to pick people off, like in close quarters. And they just don't have that segment. They don't have a moment even with Ellie. Like, they could have done it with David to build up that trust sequence. That could have been her moment to just see Ellie do full on action, which I feel like we never truly get in this season. Like, we have her obviously defeating David, but we don't have her just truly surviving, fighting the infected, or sneaking around the infected, anything like that. Ellie did not get to have that moment. And I think that really sucks for the show, because that's a huge part of the game where it's like, holy crap, not only are you playing Ellie and you have no idea, you know, like for a lot of people who watch the show, as long as you didn't look into the game, you didn't know if Joel lived or died there. Obviously in the show, they instantly go from him falling off to, you know, doing Left Behind, but in the show, it goes straight to the David stuff because they didn't have the Left Behind DLC as a story yet. So you don't know what happened. It's just you're playing as Ellie, and then you meet this dude, and then it's like, holy crap, we have to survive, because they get attacked. They get swarmed pretty much, and they have to defend each other to live. And that's how you build that trust with David versus just the conversation that they had in the show. And it's not that the conversation was bad. It's just that them bonding over literally having to save each other in order to survive, despite not really knowing each other, especially from the perspective of Ellie. You have to help each other to survive, because like, if this dude dies, even if I don't trust him, it's like the hero teaming up with the villain to defeat an even worse villain. It's like that classic thing. Like, that's exactly what that was, except you didn't really know if David was officially a bad guy yet. So they really needed that, and they didn't have it, not just because it would have added more infected, but Ellie deserved to have her own moment. And I truly don't believe she ever got it in this whole season, where it was like, here's Ellie just doing her thing. Like, she takes off on the horse, but once again, she instantly got captured. That's kind of how it happens in the game. Like, in that specific moment, she just gets captured like that. You know, she doesn't get a moment to really go crazy. You do actually take a couple of people out though, and she doesn't even get to do that really in the show. So it's like, man, they kind of shortchanged her as far as they talked about her experience. You know, she took watch in like episode 3 or 4 or whatever it was, when they were, you know, Joel went to sleep. So that, you know, they went through and talked about it, you know, obviously her shooting and, you know, them being closer, and him trusting her with weapons and holding guns and all that stuff. But she doesn't ever truly get to have a moment. And I felt like that was, even beyond not having enough infected, they would, well, yeah, you don't even have to have infected. It could have been against humans as well. But her not getting to have just her own action sequence, I felt was a true disservice to that character, because that was really a huge part of the story. Like, holy crap, this isn't just, you know, Joel trusting Ellie and saying like, all right, you know, here, hold this or do this or whatever, and they trust each other. Here is Ellie just doing it on her own, or even if they did it, you know, in the finale like they do at the game, in the game, that's the last moment where it's like they're just full on teamwork. It's like, all right, she's doing this, you're doing this, and it's just you work together to get through that subway portion. Could have made it super short. Like I said, like 3 or 4, 5 zombies. Bring a clicker in. Do it like that. It's the juxtaposition of episode 2 versus the finale, and it's like she's not as scared anymore. Like, they know how to do it. They could have threw a brick. That's a classic from the game for anyone who doesn't play, but like, they could have had the brick in there and been like, boom, that's the distraction. She drops down from something, stabs in the neck, whatever. teamwork, even if it's not her by herself. An action moment, truly action moment with Ellie is well deserved, and they did not do that. And it kind of sucks that we have to wait until it's like, depending on how they do it, I guess it would, the older version, because she's older in the second game. It's like we won't really get to experience that until it's the older version of Ellie, but she was capable of doing it because we see it in the game, and they don't really give her that in the show, and that really sucks. That honestly, I think worse than not having nearly enough infected. That I think is far worse, because it's a true disservice just straight up to the character and story as a whole, and just being like, she's capable at this point, she can do it on her own, and only having that through her killing David, I don't think is enough, because she needs more than just she beat the written horrible guy, but she needed to have a moment where it's not just one guy, or it's not just one infected. Like, she does what she needs to do beyond hunting, beyond killing this one dude and sneaking around and getting them. She should have had her own action sequence, or at the very least, they should have had that final moment where they are just like completely sympathetic, and she gets to do like her own action within that sequence. He doesn't have to feel like he babysits her. She can go off around the corner and he's like, I know she got it from that angle, I'll handle this side. Like, just any of that stuff, they totally miss out on having it in there. And it's so weird to me that they wouldn't consider that important enough to spend the money on that versus some of the stuff that we don't really get to see. For instance, the bloater showing up literally one time in the season. That suit, I think I mentioned this in that review for episode 3 or 4, that suit costs like $500,000. It's insane. It's like an insane amount of money, and it literally is only in that first or in that one episode, which is really weird to me. So, missed out on the infected. Personally, missing out on Ellie having her own action sequence is way worse, but it doesn't mean that I don't like the show or anything like that. Ultimately, I just like the game more. I just 100%. I would rather play the game than watch the show. But I still definitely enjoyed the show. It was still fun to go through and see what they would do and how they would adapt things, how they would change things. But if you go back through the whole season, it's like, all right, well, not nearly enough infected. Quite a few moments were changed personally, not for the better, for me. And then you have the ending where it was like, really the ending for sure. The infected thing, like, it definitely comes back, but the Ellie stuff and the infected thing as a combination definitely hurts it. I think the infected thing is like an overall thing, and then the Ellie thing is just like, man, that's a disservice to one of 2 major characters, 3 if you really count Tommy, who, because it's a show, isn't in it nearly as much as he is in the video game. So it's just like, man, real disservice to her character, personally speaking. Obviously, through dialogue and whatnot, we know she's capable, but she deserves a full-on action sequence. Whether it was by herself, especially, would have been cool, but whether it was by herself or with Joel, she deserved to have like a moment that was like, here's a true highlight of how far Ellie has come from the girl that was just like, holy crap, he's beating the F out of this dude in the rain when they first escaped the town. Like, she needed to have her own true moment of just being like really badass as a kid. So felt like they missed out on that, and that really sucks, because once they do the older version, it's like, well, she's older now, of course she's done it. Well, the kid version, it adds that shock value of like, oh dang, she got it. Once you're old, once you're an adult, you're just like, oh yeah, you're supposed to be doing that. But when you do it as a kid, that's how it's seen. It's like, holy crap, you can do that as a kid. That's special. When you do it as an adult, it's like, that's what you're supposed to be able to do. So it kind of takes away from it a little bit, but not like it kills the show or anything like that. Obviously, if you've watched the show, you might not play games. The game's been out forever. If you haven't played it at this point, it's probably because you don't really play games, but I recommend it for sure. At the very least, you got 2 great stories. Either way, the show is still really, really good. And then you have a really, really good version of that story that's expanded upon in the game. Oddly enough, through combat versus through actual dialogue, like, there's a lot of stuff expanded because you get to see characters talk more, not being tied to just Joel. But there is a lot that's done through the action of the game, admittedly, that does end up being missed out on because you're just watching it. So there are a lot of, of course, you just also get more time with the characters. If you like the characters in general, you'll see it definitely. I think everyone's pretty much the same except for Joel, because they have to make him more sympathetic. So it's much faster, where it's like, oh man, he's crying and he's scared and stuff like that. It's like much quicker compared to the game, where he's like cold for a super long time, and then winter hits and it's like, oh okay, yeah, it's a little wild right now. So still enjoy the show overall. Of course, it was incredibly well done. I can't wait to see what they do for season 2, things that they change, things that they keep the same. The whole controversy around it, very curious what they decide to do. Because my one issue with the second game was the pacing. I love the story, and I still to this day believe if they just changed, like they just rearranged stuff, and it was just like it took a little longer for certain story elements to play out, and it wasn't just here's this half of the story and then stop, and then here's this part of the story, which it's a hard cut. Believe me, if you have not played the second game, it is a hard cut because it was one of my favorite gaming experiences. My heart was racing, and it was like, this is so cool. I don't know what's gonna happen. I can't wait to see it. And then it cuts to black, and I was like, it's not happening now, right? And then it does, like a specific thing happens, and I was like, that is tough. Because I was like I was at a million, and it was just like pew, straight down to zero. And I was a little upset. I was like, okay, I have to deal with it. That's how it is. It's one thing I hate. One thing I hate about the whole game is just the way they did the pacing. It was like, just swap some things here and there, and I think that whole story plays out way better for people. But that's my opinion on the game. Part 2, part 1, the show, part 1. We'd love to know your thoughts on this, especially if you played the game, whether you have or hadn't. I think both perspectives are very interesting. It's one of the great things about this is that it's such a good adaptation that's such a deviation at the same time that everyone can be like, oh, this thing is very good because it's just like this, or this thing is very good because it's very different from this. And then people who have no idea, it's just, well, did you like this or did you not like this? And it's like, well, this was done this way in the game. What do you think about it now? So there's so many different ways you can kind of experience this, and just, you know, kind of talking to people who have played it and haven't played it, and then telling them about how it was in the game versus what happened in the show and what they think about that, and whether they think the game was better, even not playing it, just hearing about it. So you know, there's a lot of ways to really enjoy this even after the show is done, just hearing so many different people and their perspectives on it, and, you know, kind of learning more about the world itself. But we'd love to know what you guys thought about this one, so please put your comments down in the comment section below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts about it, the finale and the series as a whole. Of course, thoughts and theories for season 2, mostly if you played. If not, I would love to know just what random theories you have going into season 2. Like, obviously not really a cliffhanger, so I would love to know any random thoughts anyone might have, if you even made it this far. I know this is like almost 40 minutes long, but there's a lot to say about this one with it being an adaptation, especially being a TV show adaptation. A lot more to really discuss and go through episode by episode. So would love to know your thoughts on it as a whole. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.